session outlines financial risks related to climate change, the measures to reduce those risks, as well as their underlying causes and how we can work towards achieving a carbon neutral economy. And for that purpose, folks, we are very privileged this afternoon to have a program manager for the Climate Change Group of the World Bank. Here is Luis Tineo.
I would like to thank Thais, David, and the whole team at the Volo Foundation for inviting me over here. I'm impressed with the event, and I'm impressed with the colleagues that preceded me, so I hope I don't disappoint you. Try to make it fun. I will try to bring a different perspective to the conversation that we have had here. It's a great community here of activists, leaders, experts on climate and sustainability. So I hope that I can contribute a bit to this program by adding the dimensions that go a little outside of the US context, which is the developing world. So my topic is, does climate change matter for development? And by development, I mean by alleviating poverty, bringing more prosperity to developing countries. We are talking about a space of about 800 million people who live on kind of like $1 a day, $1 plus a day. If you think about it, in the US, the poorest goes by with about $6, $7 a day. So we are trying in the World Bank to alleviate poverty by bringing 800 million people up to better prosperity, and with that, then having better standards of living. My colleagues in the previous session were, highlighting the number of consequences of climate change for this community. Imagine then that outside of the country. So when we go about this, I will try to run, and I hope that I have the time right, this in three elements. One is, what is the interface between climate, sustainability, and development? Second, what are we doing in terms of climate action at the global level? What is the level of ambition to solve the problem? And last, if I have time, I will explain a bit of what we are doing in the World Bank and how we can connect with the efforts that you are doing. And I hope that with that, then Volo can be a new contributor to the cause of climate change. This is the problem, right? We don't want to lose it. And we are about, to do so if we don't make progress in the next decade, most likely before 2050. So I don't think that I need to educate anybody here about this chart. This is basically how rapidly the problem is evolving. And we are talking about the issue of warming the planet, right? And the risk of reaching the 2 degrees Celsius of warming. And it's going pretty fast, as you can see. I'm not using my opinion. This is NOAA. And this morning, as every morning, I go into the website of the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, and today, emissions are up to 422 ppt. I'll explain this a little later, but keep this number in mind. Nothing weird to you here in Florida, right? This is what we see pretty much every week around the world. A month ago, it was in Pakistan. This morning, it was in Mozambique. Here, when we have the hurricane season, papers all over the world show what's happening here. Weird, last year we saw hurricanes up in Maine. And then you have fires, then you have drought, then you have more the rainy season and longer, cyclones, hurricanes, all kinds of weird events. Sorry. The causes of it, we know it. It's all about sources of energy for our consumption. And these are the main contributors, right? In a simple way. We are talking about greenhouse gas emissions, the main cause of climate change. This is a little old slide, but when I was in Glasgow, in the COP 2 years ago, that was the state of the art of the planet then. 2021 was the weirdest in terms of natural hazards and events. I didn't know enough, but 2022 it is actually the weirdest. So my colleague before said that in Florida, 2022 was the warmest. Well, it was the warmest also in Brazil. It was the warmest also down in Antarctica. It was the warmest in Canada. In Canada. So if we go around the world, we'll see all these kind of like anomalies in the behavior of climate. And that is happening more frequently and is coming more forcefully as well. I guess that this picture is also clear to many of you here. Some of the previous panels, especially in the morning, were talking about these things. So what we have at the center of this is energy. And sometimes people think that there is a clear relation between climate change and the environment. Without analyzing that the problem of climate change is the use of energy. Of course, one source of energy is that we need to expend natural resources, and the environment is damaged as a result. But it is in energy where we have the problem. And you see all the industries around that are contributing to the problem of climate change. Let me run quickly the Roman history of this, because it's important for us to see whether the pace of solving the problem is on the right track, or rather, it's a little off. So what happens when you're talking about development? I said, well, you're talking about economic growth, social development, and prosperity, right? Better standards of living. We want to live longer, more healthier, in healthier ways. We want to enjoy more, life. We want to be materially satisfied, I guess, and then evolving as human beings. So when you talk about development, whether in the US or else, climate change messes it up, because it brings a huge externality to what otherwise has been regular life. And before, say, if you go back in the 1970s, development and climate change had nothing to do. Probably the story was about protecting the planet, meaning trees, rivers, oceans. It was about being green, protecting the green part for the blue part of the planet. Climate was not a factor. We had issues with pollution, do you remember? But climate and climate change, global warming, those were not words in our vocabulary. If you move to the next decade, then people started seeing that development and climate change had a relationship. And lately, up until now, it's more like, oh, now climate is a fundamental factor for development. If we don't solve climate change, there is no chance for development. And that is basically the key message. Climate change needs to be prioritized. And all of you are definitely committed to doing that, as I heard this in this conference. I'd like to keep you here, focus on this. These are 3 things that I'd like you to see in the next 3 slides. The first one is this is a key number. This is the concentration of gases in the atmosphere. This is who we are in the planet, and this is whether, who of us are in extreme poverty. That's what we want to solve, say, in the World Bank and in many institutions, including probably Volo Foundation. I'd like to point out that in the conversation between climate and development, in this decade, there was a wall. Science was nowhere to be found, policy was nowhere to be found, and global solutions were kind of like starting to flourish, I guess. So if you go here to the next decade, then we started seeing that cambio climático y desarrollo started to talk to one another. And then science and policy started to talk to one another. And then globally, countries started to talk to one another. Now, back to the numbers. You see a little increase here, right? And then you see that we are growing by 1 billion. We added 1 billion people in 10 years. But poverty was dropping by almost 10 points. If we keep going to the next decade, then now the relationship between climate change and development was a lot closer. Technology, better data analysis started to show that the relationship between science and policy needed to be, more integrated. And the global discussion started to become, also closer and closer, more frequent. More experts were bringing, new ideas, new analysis, new recommendations that were creating more consensus around climate change. Back to the numbers. Now you see how dramatically we are increasing the gas emissions and the concentration of ppm. We added 1 more billion people. Yet, we were, solving the problem of poverty around the world by dropping almost another 10%. I would say that in this decade, we were all super happy. We were wealthier, we were healthier, we were enjoying, the incredible levels of welfare and well-being. When you go to the next is when you start seeing a shift. It's not that one is a complementary of the other, is that now climate started to become more of a threat. The risks were higher. And then anything that you had in mind in terms of planning for development started to become shaky. Your fundamentals were no longer the same because countries, governments needed to start integrating disaster risk management, disaster risk losses and damages, recovery. The lack of resilience meant that the infrastructure was not good enough to sustain the forces of nature. Science and policy became, then more like a little more of in attention, because science was demonstrating that the problem was becoming harder and harder to solve. I have 3 minutes, and I'm sorry, but let me quickly go through the numbers. You see now that in this decade, now the ppm is going through the roof, and it arrived at the deadly number of 400. I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what it means, ppm at 400. But think about that, is a disaster. And we are heading towards the 450 and possibly to the 500, where you will see the 2 degrees or 3 degrees that will make the planet irreversible. The planet will not have enough systems to cope with the warming of the planet. Yet, we are adding another billion. Now we are arriving at 8 billion people. But you see, poverty is lower. We are almost eradicating poverty in the decade before. So therefore, what does it mean that we have less poverty? That we have more consumption. So here is where I'm going to finish with, to let you think about the challenges that we have with the world outside of the United States. One is, yes, poverty is being solved, and then what happens? You have growth, economic growth. With economic growth, you have better human development. Better human development, more consumption, right? More consumption means more energy. More energy, more ppm. More ppm, our planet is suffering. So what happens? That then you have, do we have a trade-off now? Do we solve the problem of climate change, or do we solve the problem of poverty? Do I solve the problem of economic growth and human development, or I solve climate change? In the World Bank, we think that no, that is not the right way of seeing this. The right way of seeing this is the poorest countries need to pollute to get out of poverty. And the richer countries need to decarbonize faster so that we can compensate and reconcile the two. For the poorest world, they need to go from $1 a day to 2 or 3. That implies that they need to emit gases at about 4%. That is negligible compared to the efforts that, say, North America, which solve the problem of poverty, right? Europe, they solve the problem of poverty. They need to decarbonize faster. And by faster means bringing technology, solutions, committing to bringing their economies to net zero, and with that then allow the poor to pollute a bit while benefiting at the end from the transitions that need to happen, right? Because technologies will make solutions cheaper, investments will grow because they will reach more population. That population that is capable now of absorbing more consumption is the one that mobilizes the private capital required to bring these solutions, the transitions to renewables or clean energy or better use of energy, retrofitting buildings, bringing e-transportation, bringing more efficiency to their economies using, greener solutions. That is the problem that we need to have right now. And leaders around the world need to figure this out because we need to reconcile the two. Because the risk is that climate change will bring back about, in our estimates, more than 200 million people back into poverty. So the progress that we have made so far at bringing, world's poverty to 15%, going downwards, can go all the way up again. Then you have climate change plus poverty. My colleagues here in the previous session indicated all the problems, health problems, for example, can be exacerbated. Then you keep going. The infrastructure is not going to be sufficient. The financial sector will not have enough resources to deal with the problem. Governments will go broke. There is no government with sufficient resources to address climate change on its own. So it's a global problem, but climate change is unjust because, the consequences of climate change are borne more by the poor. So in this kind of cycle, we need to create positive outcomes. And I believe that there is a conversation to have, and it's happening every year more frequently to try to solve this issue. I guess that my time is up. Thank you very much.